Justice is garbage. That's how the sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump, the 47th commander-in-chief, mocked his opponent inside the halls of Congress. But behind those three words lies a truth America can't ignore. Over 60% of Americans believe their justice system is broken. 1 in 3 black men in this country will face prison in their lifetime. And now, in a hearing broadcast to millions, one woman dares to challenge the most powerful man in the nation. Her name is Jasmine Crockett, a voice he tried to silence, a warrior he dismissed as garbage. What happens when the insult becomes the spark and the battle for justice begins? The gavel struck like thunder, wood against wood, a sound that silenced every whisper in the chamber and made the walls of Congress tremble. Bright lights flooded the room. Cameras clicked and flashed like a swarm of restless insects, hungry to devour every gesture, every twitch of the lips, every beat of sweat. Rows of journalists pressed forward, notebooks trembling in their hands because they knew this was not just another hearing. This was history in the making. And then he walked in, Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States. His posture was heavy with arrogance, his smile cut like a blade sharpened on contempt. Every step he took echoed with entitlement, as if the floor itself bent under his command. The audience hushed. Some rose in reverence. Others tightened their jaws in rage. But no one could ignore him. He didn't greet. He didn't nod. He didn't wait. Instead, with a voice soaked in disdain, he hurled his opening dagger. Today, justice will not stand. The words weren't loud, but they carried. They slithered under the seats, crawled up spines and tightened around throats. They tasted like smoke and ash. And across the room, she rose, Jasmine Crockett, her eyes sharp as unsheathed steel, locked onto him. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She stood with the fire of a woman who had been underestimated too many times, dismissed too many times, and had come to burn every insult into ashes. Her voice sliced the tension in half. Then let today be the day justice learns to fight back. A collective gasp surged through the chamber. Reporters nearly dropped their pens. Senators glanced at one another, uncertain whether to shrink or to lean in closer. Trump's grin faltered, just for a moment. But arrogance is quick to recover. He leaned forward, his small eyes narrowing like a predator spotting prey. The air thickened. You could feel it pressing against your skin, crawling into your lungs. Every person in that chamber, politicians, journalists, aides, felt the weight of an invisible battlefield rising around them. This wasn't dialogue anymore. It was war, and war has its silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, chaos. Reporters shouted questions, voices colliding in the air. Flashbulbs exploded like gunfire. Some in the gallery cheered, others booed, and the sound merged into an electric storm that rattled the walls. The chairman slammed the gavel again, his face flushed crimson. Order! Order in this chamber! But order was already dead. Jasmine didn't break eye contact with Trump. She could feel the heat of his disdain crawling across the floor like a spreading fire. And yet, beneath that fire, there was fear. Because for the first time in years, Donald Trump had met a voice he couldn't mute. He leaned toward the microphone, his words slow, venomous. You don't belong here, Crockett. People like you never did. Gas rippled through the chamber. Everyone understood the weight of that sentence. It wasn't just political, it was racial, it was historical, it was the echo of centuries of exclusion, of injustice, of doors slammed shut on those who dared to demand equality. Jasmine inhaled deeply, her chest rising like a warrior drawing her sword. She answered, her tone calm, steady, laced with a deadly precision that cut deeper than a scream. People like me built this nation, and people like you fear the day we finally claim it back. The chamber erupted again. Cheers clashed with jeers. The gallery split into factions, some clapping furiously, others shouting with veins bulging on their necks. Trump's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. He was losing the silence, and silence is power. The chairman's gavel pounded harder, but even he knew nothing could contain what had just been unleashed. Every camera, every lens, Every microphone was now a weapon, capturing each word, each glare, each tremor in the room. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a trial of power, a collision between justice and authority, truth and tyranny. And in that maelstrom of chaos, a shadow stirred. Behind Jasmine, in the second row of witnesses, someone shifted in their seat. The figure's face was hidden beneath a wide hat, head bowed low, hands folded tightly as if guarding a secret too heavy to hold. No one noticed at first. The room was drowning in noise, but Jasmine felt it. A presence, a weight, the kind of silence that screams louder than thunder. Her eyes flicked, just for a second, to the figure seated behind her. Trump noticed too. His gaze followed hers, and for the first time that day, his smirk cracked into something darker. Recognition, fear, because sometimes the most dangerous witness is not the one who speaks, but the one who waits. The silence cracked. Trump leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, lips curling into the kind of smile that doesn't warm. It burns. And then, like a viper striking, he spat his venom. "You," he sneered, pointing a thick finger at Jasmine, "are nothing but a loudmouth puppet, a rookie lawyer playing dress-up in a room meant for leaders. You don't know the law. You don't know power. You're here for one reason, because they needed a face to check a box." Gas rippled through the chamber. The words hung heavy, sharp with racism, dripping with misogyny, crafted to cut deeper than any policy debate ever could. Some in the gallery smirked, emboldened by his cruelty. Others stiffened in outrage. But all eyes darted back to Jasmine. Would she flinch? Would she absorb the poison and fall silent? No. She rose taller, her presence filling the chamber with a force that could not be ignored. Her voice rang out, crisp and unshaken. "Mr. Trump, if I'm just a puppet, tell me, how many puppets does it take to cover up your scandals?" The words detonated like dynamite. The reporters gasped so loud it sounded like a wave crashing against stone. Cameras zoomed in, desperate not to miss a flicker of Trump's reaction. For the first time that day, Donald Trump froze. Just a second, maybe two, but long enough for the world to notice. The silence was deafening. His jaw stiffened, his knuckles drummed nervously against the table, as if to remind himself he still had control. Jasmine pressed forward, her eyes never leaving his. "Stormy Daniels, the hush money, the indictments stacking higher than your towers. You came in here today to lecture me about justice. So tell the American people." She slammed her palm on the table. "How many lies did it take for you to stay in power?" The chamber erupted. Shouts, cheers, outrage, the kind of chaos that feeds history books and headlines. Journalists scrambled, their fingers flying across keyboards, their microphones trembling as they tried to capture every syllable, every ounce of fire. The chairman pounded the gavel, sweat beating down his temple. "Order! I demand order!" But there was no order. There was only fire. Trump's face, flushed scarlet, tightened into a mask of fury. His lips curled, his teeth clenched, his eyes darted like a cornered beast searching for an escape. But escape wasn't in his nature. Attack was. And so he leaned into the microphone, voice low, steady, dangerous. "You think you've trapped me, Jasmine? You think you can shame me in front of cameras? I built these cameras. They worship me." His fist slammed against the table. "You're nothing but a distraction, and distractions don't last." But the wound was already bleeding. His pause, those few frozen seconds, was a crack in his armor. And Jasmine had driven the spear. The chamber knew it. The reporters knew it. Even his allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, Donald Trump had been struck not by evidence, but by humiliation. And humiliation lingers. Jasmine, sensing the shift, leaned closer. Her voice dropped, a dagger wrapped in silk. "History has a way of remembering silence, Mr. Trump, especially yours." The crowd erupted again, this time with louder cheers than jeers. It was a small victory, but one that shook the room. Trump sat back, chest heaving, eyes darkening. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not the grin of arrogance, Not the smirk of a man untouchable, but something colder, something reptilian. He reached into the leather briefcase by his side, pulled out a thick stack of papers bound in a folder so heavy it seemed to bend under its own weight. He patted it once, twice. The sound echoed like the beating of a war drum. And then he leaned forward, his voice slicing through the chamber like ice. You just opened the gates of hell. The room fell silent. The cameras zoomed in, the microphones trembled, and even Jasmine, still unflinching, felt the tremor of what was coming next. Because in Washington, words can kill, and Trump had just drawn his first blade. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. Instead, she reached calmly into her own folder, black, slim, unassuming, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The crowd hushed. Cameras snapped closer, the sound of shutters overlapping like a drum roll. And then, with the weight of thunder, she raised her voice. This, she declared, holding the document high, is not rumor. This is not speculation. This is evidence. Her words cracked through the chamber like a hammer striking steel. This is the record of funds funneled through a shell company tied directly to your campaign, Mr. Trump. Dates, transfers, names, every line accounted for. The sheet of paper fell onto the desk with a sharp slap, the sound magnified by microphones, echoing across the hall like a gavel sealing a verdict. The chamber erupted. Trump's allies leapt to their feet, voices colliding into a roar. Lies! Fabrication! Objection! The chairman's gavel hammered desperately, but his calls for order drowned beneath the fury. It was chaos in its purest form. Shouts, slurs, papers waved, cameras flashing in a storm of light and fury. And in the middle of it all, Jasmine stood unmoving, unshaken. Her voice cut through the storm like a blade. You want to scream? Scream outside. Inside this chamber, the truth is louder than your outrage. The words carved into the uproar. For a brief moment, silence returned. And into that silence came the sound of America breathing. Because outside, on the streets of Washington, thousands had gathered. On massive screens erected in front of Capitol Hill, Jasmine's voice thundered across the city. Families stood shoulder to shoulder. Workers pressed pause on their day. Students, elders, the weary and the hopeful, all staring upward, watching history unfold in real time. And when the evidence hit the table, the roar wasn't just inside the chamber. It was outside too. Car horns blared like victory drums. Chants erupted, voices rising into the night sky. Justice, justice, justice. The world was no longer just observing. It was participating. The chamber trembled not just with politics, but with people. Trump scowled, his fists tightening, his jaw locked. He leaned to his attorneys, whispering with venom. Papers shuffled. Panic edged his side of the aisle, masked in defiance but betrayed by darting eyes. One of his closest allies shouted over the chamber, "This is a stunt, a performance for cameras. America doesn't care about old paperwork." But the cameras caught something else. Faces in his camp paling, brows furrowing, sweat glistening. Because they knew. The hammer had landed, and it landed hard. Jasmine leaned forward, voice steady as stone. Justice is not garbage, Mr. Trump. Justice is the trail of every dollar, every deal, every lie. And tonight, the American people will follow that trail. The crowd outside roared again, a thunderous answer. For a moment, Jasmine was no longer just a congresswoman. She was a voice amplified by millions. But history has a way of turning even triumph into tension. As the gavel slammed to restore control, a murmur began to ripple across the chamber. Staffers rushed in with cell phones glowing, screens flashing with breaking news. Reporters gasped, whispering frantically as they read updates passed hand to hand. Something new had entered the battlefield. A leak, an email, and not from Jasmine's folder. On the giant screens outside, the breaking banner blazed in crimson. Confidential email leaked. Trump team exposed. The chamber froze. Trump's camp stiffened, confusion flashing across their faces. Some tried to hide their phones. Others leaned close, whispering in frantic urgency. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. She hadn't seen this email. She hadn't planned this strike. Someone, somewhere, was moving in the shadows. And as the crowd outside roared louder, chanting her name, Jasmine knew one thing. The battlefield had just shifted. But Trump was never a man to surrender the field. Not here, not now. He leaned back in his chair, lips curling into that familiar smirk. A predator amused by prey that dared bare its teeth. Then slowly he rose. The room followed his every movement, tension pulling tighter with each second. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, and heavy with venom. "You think you've cornered me, Congresswoman? Cute. Very cute." He turned pacing, eyes sweeping across the chamber as though commanding it. "You forget something. I don't just fight in this room. I fight everywhere. Courts, networks, streets. I have allies in places you don't even know exist." His words slithered through the air, poisonous, calculated to suffocate. "Do you really think one piece of paper, one so-called record, can break me?" He snapped his fingers. Within seconds, aides rushed in, sleek suits, polished shoes, stacks of binders in their arms. They spread them across his desk like a general unfurling maps of war. "This," Trump thundered, "is the machinery of real power. Legal filings, motions, counter-motions, every trick, every loophole, every shadow clause buried deep in American law. My lawyers have built walls higher than your evidence can ever climb." The chamber rippled with unease. Even the chairman's gavel trembled slightly before striking for order. Trump wasn't finished. "Oh, and let's not forget," his voice dropped, mocking, sharp as broken glass. "Your past, Congresswoman Crockett, your fiery outbursts on the floor, your so-called controversial statements, the little skeletons you keep buried in your closet." Gasps sparked. Cameras zoomed closer. Jasmine's jaw clenched, but she didn't move. Trump leaned forward, eyes locked onto hers. "You lecture me on scandals. Tell me, how will America feel when they're reminded of your mistakes? The old case files, the headlines you prayed would disappear. I could resurrect them all with a single phone call." The air grew heavy. His words were no longer just debate. They were knives designed to slice not through policy, but through the heart. And for the briefest moment, Jasmine faltered. Her hand, gripping the edge of the desk, tightened. Her breath caught, just enough for the cameras to notice. The crowd outside, watching on giant screens, shifted uneasily, sensing the crack in their champion. Reporters whispered furiously, "Is she breaking? Is Trump winning this round?" Trump smelled the hesitation. He pressed harder. "You came here thinking you'd play David to my Goliath," he sneered. "But this isn't a fairy tale. This is power. And power doesn't care about your speeches. Power crushes." The chamber thundered with his words, his supporters pounding their desks, cheering, chanting his name. "Trump! Trump! Trump!" For a moment it felt as though the room itself tilted toward him, the sheer weight of his momentum threatening to drown Jasmine in its tide. But then, her eyes lifted, and in those eyes fire. The hesitation vanished, burned away in an instant by something raw, fiercer, defiance. She straightened, her voice cutting through the chaos like steel. "Mr. Trump, power may buy you allies. It may shield you in courts. It may even let you resurrect the ghosts of my past. But remember this, power without truth is a castle built on sand, and every tide eventually rises." The words hit like lightning. The chamber gasped. Outside, the crowd roared back to life, chanting her name louder than ever. Jasmine Crockett was not crumbling. She was igniting, but Trump only smiled. A cold, calculated smile that froze the air. He tapped a manicured finger on one of the binders before him. Then, almost lazily, he pulled out a folder sealed with red tape, its cover stamped with a single word. "Confidential." The chamber hushed instantly, a silence heavy enough to suffocate. Trump held it up for all to see, the fluorescent lights gleaming off its surface. "Congresswoman," he said, voice dripping with menace, "you may think the tide is yours, but this," he shook the folder, its papers whispering inside, "this is your tide turning. This is the proof America hasn't seen. The proof that you are not the hero you claim to be." Gas detonated across the chamber. Reporters leapt to their feet, shouting questions. Cameras zoomed tighter, hungry, desperate. Jasmine stood rigid, her eyes locked on the folder, her heart pounding like war drums. Because if that file was real, everything could change. Trump's grin widened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, savoring the silence before the storm, "let's talk about her secrets." He placed the folder on the desk with a dramatic thud, as though it were a coffin being sealed. Gasps and whispers swirled like a rising storm. Jasmine did not blink. Her pulse thundered in her veins, but her gaze stayed locked on him, steady, unflinching, unyielding. When Trump finally cracked the folder open, waving a sheet of paper like a dagger, the room seemed to shrink. "This," he announced, "is the truth Congresswoman Crockett doesn't want you to see. Emails, transfers, deals that smell worse than the swamp she claims to fight. Ladies and gentlemen, here lies the mask ripped clean off." His supporters howled in triumph, pounding their fists against the desks, chanting his name. But Jasmine remained still. Then slowly she rose, and when she spoke, her voice carried the calm precision of a blade sliding from its sheath. "Mr. Trump," she said, "it's remarkable how easily you mistake fiction for fact." She walked toward the clerk's desk, hand extended. "May I?" The chairman, sensing the gravity, nodded. The clerk handed Jasmine the so-called damning sheet. She held it up, turning it toward the cameras, toward the world. "Let's examine this evidence," she declared, her tone sharp as iron. Her finger traced a line of text. "Here, an email address supposedly linked to me, except this domain did not even exist in the year the email was dated. And here," she flipped to another page, "a signature forged so clumsily it wouldn't pass the scrutiny of a middle school notary." The room rippled with disbelief. Murmurs spread. Reporters scrambled, fact-checking on their phones, eyes widening as they realized she was right. Jasmine raised her chin higher, her voice booming now. "This folder is not truth. It is forgery, fabrication, a desperate attempt to smear with shadows what cannot be defeated with light." For the first time that day, the cheers for Trump faltered. His supporters' voices wavered, uncertainty creeping in. And Jasmine wasn't finished, because she had come prepared for this moment. "Mr. Chairman," she continued, "with your permission, I would like to call forward someone who can confirm the origin of these forgeries." The chamber froze. All eyes turned to the back doors. They creaked open. A figure stepped forward, an unassuming man in glasses, clutching a folder of his own. Jasmine's voice softened, yet carried immense weight. "This," she announced, "is Daniel Mercer, former IT contractor for one of Mr. Trump's closest allies. He has sworn testimony and records showing that these so-called emails were manufactured on private servers under the direction of Trump's network." The silence broke into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed like lightning, members of Congress half rose from their seats in disbelief. Trump's face hardened, his jaw clenching, his knuckles whitening against the desk. Jasmine pressed forward, seizing the opening. "For years, America has been told to believe in the loudest voice, the biggest spectacle, the boldest show. But today the truth has a voice, and it stands here." The crowd outside exploded, chants of her name shaking the very ground. Inside, a shift could be felt, subtle but undeniable. Several neutral members, faces that had stayed impassive all morning, now leaned forward, their eyes sharp, their loyalty beginning to fracture. The tide was turning. Jasmine's heart pounded, but her stance remained firm, unbending, unbreakable. She looked at Trump directly, her voice cutting through the thunder like a bell. "Your games end here." For a heartbeat, the chamber was utterly still. Then, Trump's hand slammed down on the table, the crack echoing like a gunshot. Papers leapt into the air. The entire room jolted. His face twisted with fury, veins rising on his temples as he bellowed, his voice raw and primal. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The chamber trembled with the force of it, and Jasmine, though her heart raced, did not flinch. Because now everyone watching knew the war was far from over. Trump leaned back, his grin returning. Colder now, sharper, a blade dipped in venom. "You see," he said, his voice dropping into that dangerous hush that made every ear strain closer. Words are cheap, speeches are wind, but the law, he tapped the folder before him, the law can crush. The chamber stilled. Trump spread his arms, playing to the cameras, to the millions watching beyond those walls. One misstep, one careless slip of the tongue, and Congresswoman Crockett's career doesn't just end. It disintegrates, gone, finished, buried beneath legal rubble she'll never climb out from. His words slithered through the air like smoke, suffocating, poisonous. A chill passed through the room. Reporters froze mid-note. Even hardened members of Congress shifted uneasily, their gazes darting from Trump to Jasmine, as though witnessing a lion circling its prey. Jasmine's throat tightened. She swallowed, steadying herself. This was no longer about a single forged document. Trump was laying a minefield, one she would have to navigate with absolute precision. The trap was simple yet devastating. A single error in her rebuttal, an incorrectly cited statute, a misquoted precedent, even a hesitation misconstrued. And Trump's team of legal wolves would seize it, magnify it, weaponize it. The silence pressed down heavier than steel. Jasmine shifted in her chair, the heat of the spotlight baking her skin. Her palms dampened with sweat. Every camera lens seemed to zoom in closer, capturing each flicker of movement, each twitch of her hand, each tremor in her breath. Her mind raced. Stay calm, stay sharp. This is what he wants, your fear on display. Trump leaned forward, sensing her pause. Oh, don't look so nervous, he mocked, his voice dripping with theatrical pity. It's only your entire reputation on the line. One wrong word, Jasmine, and I'll have a dozen lawsuits on your doorstep before you make it home tonight. A ripple of cruel laughter echoed from his loyalists. Jasmine clenched her jaw. Her heart pounded so hard it felt as if the microphones might catch its rhythm. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple. She brushed it away, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. The chamber was electric with suspense. A nation held its breath. Would she falter? Would she crumble under the crushing weight of Trump's trap? The chairman cleared his throat, his voice a low rumble. Congresswoman Crockett, do you wish to respond? All eyes snapped back to her. Jasmine rose slowly, deliberately as if standing on glass that could shatter with the slightest misstep. Her knees locked against the tremor in her legs. She opened her mouth, but the words caught, jammed in her throat like stone. Trump's grin widened. The tension coiled tighter, suffocating, unbearable. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter whispered, "She's cornered." Jasmine exhaled, steadying her breath, forcing calm into her limbs. But still, the trap was everywhere. A wrong phrase and he would strike. A misplaced statistic and the wolves would pounce. The sweat on her palms slicked her notes. She shifted them, but the papers slipped slightly in her grasp, fluttering. The cameras zoomed in instantly, catching it, magnifying it into an image of doubt. Trump chuckled low, savoring it. And then, the doors at the back of the chamber creaked open. A figure moved in the shadows, swift and deliberate, avoiding the spotlight but undeniable in presence. The room stirred, heads turned, murmurs rose. The figure stopped at the clerk's table, slid a sealed folder, thick, bound in red, directly toward Jasmine. The cameras clicked furiously. Jasmine stared at it, her pulse hammering. The seal was marked top secret. Her fingers hovered above it, trembling. Trump's smirk faltered, just for a fraction of a second. Gasps rippled across the chamber. The chairman frowned, leaning forward. Congresswoman Crockett, do you know the source of this document? Jasmine's eyes flicked up, scanning the room, searching the shadows where the messenger had vanished. Her lips parted, but no words came. The weight of the folder burned against her fingertips. Whatever lay inside could change everything, or destroy her completely. The trap had just grown larger, and the world waited to see if she would open it. Jasmine's fingers pressed firmly on the red-sealed folder. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but when she lifted her gaze, her eyes were no longer trembling. They were steel. With a calmness that felt almost supernatural, she broke the seal. The chamber leaned in as one. The sound of the paper tearing echoed like a gunshot. Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smirk growing wider. "You're finished," he whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch, letting the words drip like acid. "Open it. See how deep the hole goes. You're done." Jasmine ignored him. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavier than stone. Reporters forgot to type. Senators forgot to breathe. Only the faint, razor-thin sound of paper sliding beneath her fingers remained. Flip, flip. Every turn of a page was a thunderclap in the stillness. The cameras zoomed so close that even the tremor of her eyelashes was broadcast live to millions. Trump tilted his head, watching her like a predator, savoring the inevitable collapse of its prey. "Go on," he taunted softly, his grin sharp. "Keep reading. That's the evidence that buries you. Evidence your allies can't explain away. Evidence that—" Jasmine's hand stilled on a page. Her eyes narrowed. Her expression didn't falter, but a flicker, a flash of something unreadable, passed over her face. Gasps shivered through the crowd. Trump caught it instantly. His smile widened into a grin of triumph. "There it is," he declared, slapping the table with the palm of his hand. "The nail in your coffin. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing history. The fall of Jasmine Crockett." The words echoed, bouncing off the chamber walls, feeding the frenzy of cameras. But Jasmine didn't move. Her hand lingered on the paper, her gaze locked, her body motionless, except for the rise and fall of her breath. The silence deepened until it became unbearable, a silence so sharp it carved into the skin. Every tick of the clock was deafening. Every second stretched into an eternity. And still, she read. Her jaw tightened, but her eyes grew colder with each line. Flip, flip. The quiet shredded nerves across the room. The audience leaned forward so far their shadows stretched over the desks. Reporters clutched their pens so tightly they nearly snapped. No one dared break the spell, not even Trump. For the first time, his smirk faltered, just slightly, as he realized Jasmine was no longer trembling. She was absorbing, calculating, transforming. Finally, Jasmine reached the end. The last page rested beneath her palm. Her fingers lingered on it, pressing down as though sealing the weight of every word into her skin. She inhaled slowly, and then, with deliberate finality, she closed the folder. The clap of its cover against the table cracked through the silence like thunder. Every head jerked upward. Every camera lens snapped tighter. Jasmine looked up, her lips curved, not in fear, not in defeat, but in something far more dangerous. A smile, calm, controlled, lethal. Her eyes locked on Trump. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice steady, low but cutting through the silence like glass breaking. "This is the endgame." The chamber erupted. Gasps, shouts, the press exploding in a frenzy. But Trump's eyes narrowed, his grin collapsing into a snarl. Because Jasmine Crockett had not fallen into his trap. She had just turned it against him. And though no one yet knew what was inside that folder, her smile told the world one thing with chilling certainty. "This," she whispered, every syllable dripping with finality, "is your ending." The chamber froze. Then Jasmine stood. Her chair slid back with a sharp scrape against the marble floor. The sound alone was enough to send shivers through the gallery. She held the folder at her side, not as a shield but as a weapon, poised, deadly, waiting to be unleashed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, steady as stone. "You have heard rumors. You have been fed shadows, distortions, lies. But tonight," she lifted the folder high, her eyes locking with Trump's, "you will hear the truth." Trump shifted in his seat, smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, but a twitch flickered in his jaw. Jasmine placed the folder onto the table, opened it slowly, and slid out a sleek black drive. Her hand hovered for a moment before she connected it to the chamber's massive display system. A collective breath was held. The screens blinked alive. Numbers, dates, financial transfers, names, networks. The data spilled across the screen in ruthless order, every detail a nail hammered into the coffin of Trump's denials. The audience erupted in murmurs. Senators craned forward, their eyes widening as they processed the evidence now blazing larger than life. This, Jasmine said, her finger stabbing at the screen, isn't hearsay. These are transactions, direct, deliberate, and criminal. She pressed a key. And then it came. The chamber was pierced by a voice. Trump's voice. No, they'll never trace it back to me. Just keep the numbers clean, and if anyone asks, we bury it under national security. The sound rolled across the room. Undeniable, unshakable. Reporters gasped. Cameras flashed like lightning. Trump's smirk shattered. His body jerked upright as if stung. His hands slammed against the desk, rattling the microphones. This is a lie, he bellowed, his face flushed scarlet. A fabrication. You can't. But his own voice cut him off. Don't worry. The system bends to power, and I have all the power I need. The words echoed like cannon fire. The chamber was stunned into silence, broken only by the frantic clicking of journalists hammering at their keyboards, the storm of truth racing faster than Trump's rage could catch it. Stop this, Trump roared, pointing a trembling finger at Jasmine. Turn it off. Shut it down. This is illegal. But no one moved. Not a senator, not a guard, not even the technicians, because all of them were transfixed by the sound of his voice damning him beyond denial. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the mic, her tone sharp as a blade. You call this illegal? What you did, that was illegal. What you stole, what you silenced, what you tried to bury beneath shadows, that was betrayal. Trump pounded the desk again, the veins in his neck standing out like ropes. You don't know what you're playing with. Jasmine's gaze was cold, unblinking. Oh, I know exactly what I'm playing with, she said. And tonight, the world knows it too. Another clip played. If she pushes back, we crush her. If the courts don't comply, we replace them. This country bends or it breaks. Either way, we win. The room erupted in chaos. Gasps, shouts, disbelief ricocheted across the chamber walls. Several senators stood, their faces pale with shock. Others slumped in their chairs, stunned. The public gallery exploded into a storm of voices, outrage and disbelief clashing in a thunderous roar. And yet through it all, Jasmine stood still, unyielding, unshaken. Trump, however, was unraveling. He tore at his tie, his face contorting into fury and panic all at once. False, he screamed. Spliced, manufactured. Do you think I'll let you destroy me with this circus? But the voice, the damning voice, kept playing. They'll follow me because they fear me. Fear is stronger than loyalty. Fear is the only law that lasts. The words stabbed into the air like knives, undeniable in their venom. Trump staggered as if struck. For the first time, the great showman of defiance had nothing left to say. Jasmine seized the silence. She leaned forward, her voice low, dangerous, filling every corner of the room. You can deny the paper. You can sneer at the numbers, but you cannot run from your own voice. The room thundered with applause and shouts, a storm breaking loose. And then silence fell again, because Jasmine raised her hand. Her eyes flicked toward the chamber doors. A figure appeared. Slowly, deliberately, they stepped into the light. Every camera swung toward them. The world seemed to hold its breath. It was a man, his face sharp, weathered, familiar. One of Trump's closest allies, once his confidant, once his shield, and now his betrayer. Jasmine's lips curved ever so slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice ringing with finality, allow me to introduce a witness, a man who stood at his side, a man who knows the truth. The chamber exploded with noise, reporters shouting questions, senators surging to their feet. Trump's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came. The man stepped forward, his eyes heavy with secrets. The air tightened, electrified, as though the world itself leaned closer. And with every step the witness took, Trump's empire trembled. He stopped at the stand. The weight of the moment pressed down, but his voice, when it finally came, was steady, raw with truth. My name, he began, his eyes sweeping the chamber, is Richard Hale. For years, I stood beside Donald Trump. I believed in him. I defended him. I carried out his orders. Gas rippled through the gallery. Reporters scrambled to capture every syllable. Hale leaned closer to the microphone. And I am here to tell you what those orders truly were. The words detonated like a bomb. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each sentence a hammer blow. Donald Trump built not a campaign, not a presidency, but a machine. A machine fueled by fear, intimidation, and lies. I watched him twist allies into servants. I watched him turn law into a weapon. I watched him sell justice like it was his property, something to bargain, to trade, to bury when it became inconvenient. The chamber stirred, outrage mixing with horror. Jasmine's eyes burned with fire as she watched the truth unfold at last. Hale pressed on. He called it the crown, his empire, his words, not mine. He told us, his inner circle, that America wasn't a nation to serve. It was a throne to seize, a throne he would never surrender. The gallery exploded in a storm of gasps and shouts. On the massive screens, tweets and headlines lit up in real time. Your crown conspiracy trended within seconds. Social media servers strained under the weight of millions of furious voices demanding answers. Hale raised a shaking hand, not with fear but with conviction. He told us the courts would bend, that judges could be bought, that truth was nothing but a script he alone could rewrite, and when someone refused to play their part, he crushed them. I know because I carried out those orders. Reporters roared with questions, the chamber trembling under the weight of revelation. But through it all, Trump seethed. He shot to his feet, fists pounding the desk, his voice cracking with fury. Lies! All lies! He's a traitor. Paid off, blackmailed, who knows? You're all watching a setup. But the more he shouted, the more hollow his words became, because Hale's testimony was too detailed, too vivid, too real. He told us, Hale continued, his voice rising, that democracy was just theater. He said, the people don't want freedom, they want a show. Give them the lights, give them the noise, and they'll follow me into the dark. The chamber erupted again. Reporters shouted into cameras, live broadcasts flashing worldwide. Crowds outside the building screamed in protest, their chants shaking the very walls. Trump's face burned crimson, his voice strained into a desperate howl. You can't prove any of this. You can't. But Hale cut him down with one final strike. I don't need to prove it, he said, slamming a hand on the table, because you already proved it yourself when you told us fear would rule longer than law. The words echoed like thunder. Trump staggered back, his chest heaving, sweat glistening at his temples. His once commanding presence shrank into a man cornered, flailing against the inevitable. The chamber surged with chaos. Journalists running, phones ringing, voices shouting over one another. Screens across the globe flooded with breaking headlines. Witness exposes Trump's crown plot. Democracy or dictatorship? Testimony rocks nation. Social media meltdown? Sure, crown conspiracy hits 500 posts. The noise was deafening, the pressure suffocating, and yet Jasmine stood calm amidst the storm. She waited, let the chaos roar, let Trump scream himself hoarse, until the weight of silence finally returned. Then she rose. Her steps were deliberate, echoing against the marble floor. She stopped at the center of the chamber, her gaze locked on Trump's pale, trembling face. Her voice cut through the din like a blade. Richard Hale has spoken. The documents have spoken. Your own voice has spoken. And still you deny. Trump tried to reply, but his throat failed him. Only a rasp emerged, the sound of a man unraveling before the world. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes sharp with finality. Mr. Trump, she said, her voice steady, merciless, justice no longer belongs to you. The words struck like a death knell. The chamber erupted into chaos once more, but this time, Trump had no roar left to match it. His empire, his throne, his illusion of invincibility was crumbling before his very eyes. And Jasmine's words hung in the air like a prophecy fulfilled. But Donald Trump was not a man who surrendered quietly. He rose again, dragging the remnants of his strength like a wounded beast refusing death. His fist slammed against the desk, His voice, hoarse yet still thunderous, erupted through the chamber. You think you can bury me with lies? You think this circus will erase me? I made this country. Without me, you are nothing. All of you. His loyalists surged to their feet, a defiant chorus behind him. They pounded their tables, shouting, drowning the chamber in chaos. Sham! Conspiracy! Witch hunt! The words clashed and echoed like war drums, vibrating through the marble walls. Cameras quivered on their stands as the press struggled to capture every second of the spectacle. Trump stretched his arms wide as though to command the chaos itself. They want to break your champion. They want to destroy the man who stood between you and ruin. Look at her, he snarled, pointing at Jasmine. Look at what she's doing, handing your freedom to liars, to traitors, to the enemies of America. The roar from his side rose higher. His words, sharpened by desperation, still struck chords in those who refused to let go of the myth. But Jasmine did not flinch. She stood rooted, calm as a mountain, her gaze fixed on him. When she spoke, her voice cut clean through the tempest. Mr. Trump, you built your empire on fear. You silenced truth with money. You dressed power in the mask of patriotism. And yet, here we stand. Your mask shattered, your empire exposed. Her words flew like arrows, precise and piercing. Trump staggered but rallied with venom. You don't understand power. Power bends truth to its will. I decide what's real. And as long as I draw breath, millions will follow me. Not you, not your lies, me. The chamber quaked with his roar. His face was crimson, sweat rolling down his temples, his gestures grand, desperate, commanding. But Jasmine's voice rose again, steadier than steel. Truth is not yours to bend. Justice is not yours to sell. You confuse loyalty with fear and obedience with love. But look around you. Fear is crumbling. And love, real love for this country, has turned against you. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Even among Trump's circle, hesitation flickered. He saw it, saw cracks forming in his last wall of defense, and fury consumed him. Traitors! Cowards! He barked, spinning to glare at his wavering allies. Don't you dare falter! Don't you dare abandon me! Without me, you are nothing! Ooh! His voice cracked on the last word, revealing the fracture beneath the fury. And Jasmine seized it. She stepped forward, every syllable deliberate, every pause a blade sinking deeper. This is not about me. This is not about you. This is about a nation that refuses to kneel before a throne. You thought yourself a king, but America does not crown kings. It holds them accountable. The words slammed into him like a storm. For the first time, his roar faltered. The chamber fell into a tense silence, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Two figures remained locked in combat across the room, one a warrior of truth, the other a tyrant clinging to the ashes of power. Their eyes clashed, sparks crackling in the void between them. Time seemed to stretch. The gallery froze. The press forgot their pens. The world leaned closer to the broadcast. A duel without swords, yet deadlier than steel. Trump's chest heaved, his glare a firestorm of rage. Jasmine's stare was unyielding, carved from unbreakable stone. For one breathless moment, the chamber was utterly silent. It felt like standing on the edge of an explosion, the air trembling, waiting for detonation. Then, a gavel struck. The sharp crack echoed through the hall like lightning splitting the sky. All eyes swung toward the dais where the speaker stood, a heavy folder in hand. His expression was grim, carved with the weight of history. He raised the folder high for all to see. This chamber, he declared, voice steady as bedrock, will now hear a special resolution, drafted under extraordinary authority, a resolution that may decide the fate of this nation. The chamber erupted. Shouts, gasps, frantic whispers. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, sensing the gravity of the moment. Trump's lips curled into a twisted grin, as though daring the world to move against him. The resolution was placed on the desk, waiting to be read. And in the silence before its unveiling, the air itself felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. The speaker unfolded the parchment with deliberate care. His voice rang out, clear, resonant, each word striking like a gavel against stone. This resolution calls for the immediate censure and disqualification of Donald J. Trump from all positions of public trust on grounds of abuse of power and betrayal of the Democratic oath. The chamber gasped. The words tore through the air, shattering the fragile stillness. Trump jolted forward, his face flushed, his mouth opening to protest, only to be drowned by the rising hum of voices, the press firing off questions, the galleries roaring with disbelief. The speaker's gavel struck again. "Order! This chamber will proceed to vote." The hum collapsed into silence. One by one, names were called. Each aye and nay landed like drum beats in a funeral march. The tally climbed, the fate of a man and a nation etched in real time. Trump leaned back, his knuckles white against the desk. He whispered curses under his breath, eyes darting like a cornered predator searching for escape. His allies barked their dissent, but the tide was unstoppable, a swell of voices that grew heavier, louder, more inevitable with every vote. Cameras zoomed in on his face. The world watched not a leader, but a man unraveling. Jasmine sat tall, her gaze locked on the unfolding history. Every syllable of support was another stone in the fortress of truth she had built. Every vote was another crack in the illusion he had forged. And then, the final tally. The clerk's voice rang out, unshakable. "The resolution passes." The chamber exploded. Cheers burst like thunder, fists raised, applause cascading in waves that shook the very foundations of the hall. The press scrambled, shouting into microphones, history pouring into headlines faster than ink could dry. Trump froze. For a moment he simply stared ahead, unblinking, his mouth slightly parted. The roar of the chamber blurred into a dull, distant hum. The crown he had carved from bluster and fear had been ripped away, not with a bullet, not with exile, but with the quiet, unyielding force of votes. His knees buckled. He dropped back into his chair with a heavy thud, the sound swallowed by the storm around him. His shoulders sagged, his tie askew, the sweat glistening on his temples. The empire was gone. The invincible titan was just a man, cornered, diminished, dethroned. His eyes wandered aimlessly, unfocused, as if the world before him had become unrecognizable. The chants, the clapping, the storm of history, it all swirled around him, but he seemed adrift, marooned in his own collapse. And then Jasmine rose. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as though each movement was a declaration. She turned toward the chamber, her chin high, her figure steady as the eye of the storm. When she raised her hand in acknowledgement, the applause swelled into an earthquake. The walls shook with the rhythm of palms. The air thundered with unity. Reporters described it as the sound of chains breaking, the sound of a people reclaiming their voice. Jasmine's eyes, steady and luminous, scanned the room. For a moment her gaze lingered on Trump, broken, hollowed, silent. Then she looked away, as though the chapter had already closed. But in the shadows of applause, Trump stirred. His lips, pale and trembling, parted just enough for the nearest microphone to catch a whisper. "Game's not over yet." The words were barely audible, but they cut through the roar like a blade. The cameras caught it. The networks replayed it. And across the world, millions leaned forward, chilled by the venom laced in that final murmur. The chamber roared on, blind to the seed he had just planted. But Jasmine heard it. Her jaw tightened, her hand curling into a fist. For all the thunder of victory, a storm still lingered beyond the horizon. And in the midst of triumph, the shadow of Trump's whisper coiled like smoke in the air, reminding everyone that power, once lost, always seeks a way back. The resolution's passage was not just a political event, it was an earthquake. Across the nation, the tremors were felt instantly. Screens everywhere lit up with breaking news banners. Trump officially censured. Disqualified. A historic reckoning. Crockett stands as symbol of justice. The headlines multiplied, spreading like wildfire. In New York, crowds gathered in Times Square, chanting Jasmine's name, waving flags, their voices echoing off the glass towers. In Los Angeles, car horns blared in celebration, confetti cannons exploding in the streets. In Atlanta, In Detroit, in Philadelphia, city after city erupted as if a tyrant had fallen, as if chains had been broken. People danced, strangers embraced, children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving hand-painted signs that read, "Justice won today." For the first time in years, there was lightness in the air, a collective exhale that spread through the streets like oxygen. The celebration was not about politics. It was about survival, about reclaiming a sense that the system, battered and bruised, could still correct itself. And at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett. Her face appeared on every screen, every broadcast, every social media feed. The clip of her final words in the chamber went viral within minutes. Her voice unwavering, her gaze locked on Trump, her words striking with the force of history. Power belongs to the people, not to tyrants who twist it for themselves. That sentence was replayed millions of times, turned into posters, tweets, and songs. College students chanted it. Protesters painted it on banners. It became the heartbeat of a movement. Jasmine, a congresswoman who had once been underestimated, mocked, dismissed, was now elevated to the rank of an icon. Her name was spoken in the same breath as leaders who had reshaped the course of nations. Yet in the glare of victory, shadows moved. Behind the walls of private clubs and smoky back rooms, the remnants of Trump's loyalists gathered. They whispered of betrayal. They whispered of vengeance. They whispered of return. The cameras had captured Trump's collapse, but the cameras had also captured his whisper. Game's not over yet. And for those who still clung to him, those words were not a concession. They were a prophecy. On fringe networks, conspiracy hosts seized on the whisper, twisting it into a rallying cry. Online forums buzzed with feverish energy, plotting, scheming, vowing that the fight was far from finished. The man who had fallen in public still loomed in private, a ghost with unfinished business. And Jasmine felt it. The applause, the victory chants, the adoring headlines, they couldn't drown out the echo of that whisper. At night, when the noise faded and silence took hold, she would hear it again, like a serpent hissing in the dark. Game's not over yet. It haunted her because she knew it was true. History had never been kind enough to end with one victory. Tyranny didn't vanish. It mutated, shifted, adapted. Still, she carried herself with pride. On the steps of the Capitol, she addressed the nation. The crowd stretched for blocks, their cheers rolling like waves. Cameras framed her against the marble pillars, the sun cutting through clouds as if the sky itself bowed to the moment. She spoke of courage. She spoke of unity. She spoke of rebuilding faith in institutions fractured by deceit. But more than anything, she spoke of vigilance. Today, justice has prevailed. But let us not mistake a victory for the end of the battle. Darkness does not disappear because we look away. It waits. It waits for our silence, our complacency. And so, we must remain awake. We must remain unyielding. For if tyranny dares return, it will find us stronger, together, and unafraid. The crowd erupted. The words swept across the nation like a current, galvanizing, electrifying, uniting. But in the quiet corners of America, the other current flowed. In a basement studio, a talk show host snarled into his microphone, calling the resolution a fraud, a witch hunt. In a private estate, a billionaire donor raised a glass and whispered that the war had only just begun. And in the dim light of a Florida compound, Donald Trump sat in silence, his face pale, his eyes burning with a hunger that no defeat could extinguish. His whisper had already become a weapon. The world celebrated Jasmine as the embodiment of justice. But Trump's allies were already forging him into a martyr. To them, he was not a fallen tyrant. He was a wounded king, and wounded kings were dangerous. The night sky over Washington glowed with fireworks, the sound of laughter filling the air. Yet beneath the brilliance, a storm brewed, unseen but undeniable. Journalists called it a new dawn. Activists called it the rebirth of democracy. But in hushed conversations, strategists and historians reminded one another of a painful truth. No dawn comes without shadows, and those shadows were lengthening. Jasmine returned home that night to find flowers at her doorstep, letters of thanks, children's drawings taped to her door. She smiled, humbled, deeply moved. But when she stepped inside, when she closed the door and leaned against it, She allowed herself one deep, weary exhale because she knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The fall of Trump was historic, but history itself was restless. Empires did not collapse quietly. They left behind ruins sharp enough to cut, embers hot enough to reignite. As she sat by her window looking out at the city bathed in celebration, she whispered to herself, not in fear but in resolve, "Justice has won tonight, but tomorrow we fight again." And somewhere beyond the noise of fireworks and parades, the whisper of Donald Trump still lingered, circling, waiting. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the scent of thunder. In the echoes of this battle, one truth remains. Justice is never a gift. It is a duty, fragile and fierce, demanding courage from those who dare to defend it. Power will always seek to return. Darkness will always search for cracks. Yet it is in our hands, ordinary hands, to guard the light. Let this chapter remind us that integrity is not the absence of struggle, but the choice to rise again and again, even when the storm threatens to return. If this story struck a chord in you, pause here. Let it sink in. Share it. Talk about it. Pass it to someone who still believes that justice deserves a voice, no matter how loud the storm. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth is never silenced and every shadow is called by name. Hit the bell, because the fight isn't over. The next chapter is darker, sharper, and it may just change the way you see power and resistance. This tale is a fictional dramatization, born from real struggles and real courage. Any likeness to actual figures or events is coincidental, or intentional, as a mirror for us all. Thank you for standing witness. Justice is never given. It's claimed. This is Harrison Stories.